Good evening all and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Eastleigh Local Area Committee. Councillors are reminded that to take part in this meeting you must have an open mind so that you can take all the relevant considerations presented to the meeting into account in reaching your decision. By attending today you have decided that you will listen to all points of view expressed by the speakers and public and are able to participate and cannot be seen to have predetermined the applications. This meeting will be video recorded and will be uploaded to the Council's website. If any members of the public prefer not to be recorded, then please contact a member of staff. If you are planning on filming or recording the meeting, then please do let us know so that we can ensure you're not filming members of the public that do not wish to be filmed. The Chair reserves the right to ask any filming considered intrusive to be stopped. More information is available on the Council's website. We always welcome people to speak at the meeting, although this is a formal committee meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council and not a public meeting. The members of the public that have registered to speak will be invited to speak at the relevant agenda item and will be given a total of 3 minutes to speak. When the light is amber, they will have 30 seconds remaining. People wishing to speak on items on the agenda are able to do so before the debate starts. Once the debate has started, however, it's not possible to invite or receive comments from the floor. We want to be as inclusive as possible, but will not tolerate any disruptions to our meeting. Should there be any disruptions, we do have the power under the Council's constitution to remove people from the meeting or continue in private, neither of which we take lightly or wish to do so. Nikki, do we have any apologies for the meeting?
We have apologies from Councillor Tanya.
Thank you. Do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? If so, please indicate now, and when called, please state the nature and reason for the interest. You can, of course, declare any interest as they occur to you in the meeting. Thank you. We now move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March 2023. Can I now approve these as a true record? Do I have a proposer? Councillor Park. And a seconder? Councillor Bicknell. Any discussion on the minutes? Any corrections? Anything anybody wants to say? No? Okay, can we go to the vote? All agreed? Thank you. Next section is public participation. We don't have anyone who's registered for public participation, but I don't know if anybody wants to speak on anything in public that's not on the agenda. No. Okay, thank you. We now move on to the Chair's report. This is the first committee meeting since the local elections, so I'd like to offer my warmest congratulations to Councillor Mann and Councillor Tanya on getting re-elected, and a welcome back to Councillor Reynolds. It was great to visit the extended paddling pool area last weekend in such great weather, and to see so many families enjoying the larger space in the great weather. The only downside was the huge queue for Daniela's delicious ice cream, which she manages to keep at a low cost for families to enjoy. Work is progressing on the skateboard park, and we hope that this will be open before the end of summer. We have a big programme of summer events in Eastleigh, starting with the Unwrapped Street Theatre Festival this coming Saturday in Eastleigh Town Centre, and then on the Sunday in Hedge End. Eastleigh Mellor is on the 23rd of July on the Recreation Ground, and then followed on the 29th of July by a chili festival. Stephen's Fun Fair will be visiting the Rec on the 11th to the 19th of August. There'll also be a bandstand summer concert programme from June to September, ending with Eastleigh Pride on the 9th of September. Okay, so moving on to the next item, I'd like to invite Gary Osmond to give a presentation on planning guidelines. But Liz is going to do it instead. Thank you.
Sorry, just to confuse. All right, good evening. So this is just a quick run through of some planning guidelines to explain how members will be determining the planning applications this evening and the different types of applications before you. So proposals must be considered on planning grounds, and the committee must determine proposals in line with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Here in Eastleigh, the development plan consists of the Eastleigh Borough Local Plan, which was recently adopted in April last year, and the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Plan where relevant. Other material considerations include the relevant government policy, including the National Planning Policy Framework and its presumption in favour of sustainable development. In addition, the Council has various supplementary planning documents and strategies that have been adopted and need to be considered where relevant for the determination of applications. Other material considerations not related to policy include the planning history or previous applications and decisions on a site, any relevant appeal decisions as well, together with site-specific matters such as highways, residential amenity, visual impact, ecology, drainage and trees. Furthermore, there's a need to take into account any comments received from consultees or third parties, and any precedent that has been set by current case law. When making decisions, decisions that are made contrary to the recommendation must be explained and minuted with clear reasons given by members, whether the application is for approval or refusal. There is also an option open to members to defer an application to seek amendments or further information, and the committee must indicate what these are. There's also an option to add further controls on the use of the site and any details required if they're considered to be reasonable in planning terms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Gary to present his report on the planning application for the land at Nightingale Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. First planning item for this evening, item 7, so for the proposed construction of 2 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom apartments. That's right. In a 2-storey block with ancillary amenity space, landscaping, parking, bin and cycle storage at land south of Nightingale Avenue. Members that were on the committee in November last year will probably remember this site and a previous scheme that you considered. Whilst we've addressed it as Nightingale Avenue, it actually sits on a piece of land between numbers 13 and 15 Falcon Square and is accessed via the service road that accesses the rear of properties on Falcon Square and Magpie Lane, as well as some on Nightingale Avenue. But the site itself is actually accessed via Nightingale Avenue past the Parade of Shops, which are at the eastern end. We're in that part of the Avery estate, close to Fleming Park. Site itself, some photos from the previous application. Photo in the top corner shows from Falcon Square, so the site is between numbers 13 and 15 there. The photo at the bottom, or next one down, shows previous infill development on a not dissimilar site on the opposite corner of Falcon Square for, I believe they were a pair of semi-detached houses. And there's also other infill development, elsewhere in and around the Avery estate, but the predominantly is 2-storey terraced and semi-detached properties. Some further photos here. There's the shopping parade I mentioned earlier at the top there, and views of the access in from Nightingale towards the site. And views of some of the immediate neighbours. And the site itself hasn't been used for many years. I believe there are some structures on it. It's generally pretty unkempt and somewhat of an eyesore in the locality. As I said, there was a previous application considered in November last year. This isn't an amended version of that. This is a brand new scheme, a new agent, new architects working on it. So the proposal is, say, for a single 2-storey block with 2 one-bed and 2 two-bed flats. The block is roughly central on the north-south axis, or axis even. Parking is to the eastern side, whereas the previous scheme had it to the western side, accessed from the service road, with some individual private amenity spaces for the flats on the western side, whereas previously that was the car park. Each floor has a 1-bed unit and a 2-bed unit. All units have their own separate main entrance, and they all exceed our minimum floor area requirements and external amenity area requirements as well, with those immediate amenity spaces outside. One point of note is the first floor unit to the south, so this is unit 4, the kitchen and bathroom window are recommended that they be obscure glazed, and as a condition to that effect, because these are the windows that would most likely result in some overlooking of the neighbouring property number 13. If I not jump back, So this is number 13 Falcon Square. Those windows are positioned approximately here. So they would, they're obscure glazed to protect the most private part of the garden of number 13. In terms of elevations, say single two-storey block, material-wise, intended to use red brick and clay tile roof to complement existing materials found in and around the Avery estate. The scheme also includes some architectural features found around the Avery estate, so we have gabled end elevations, sort of cat slide style roofs, and in terms of the previous scheme, which was quite a generic approach, this is a bespoke scheme which has taken hints from the Avery estate, in the hope that it should blend in a bit more comfortably than previous schemes. And just to assist in terms of appreciating the size and scale, these are two street scene drawings. So the top one there is the northern elevation, although you would never actually see it in its full because there are garden boundaries and so on. No, sorry, the top one is the eastern elevation, apologies. And the bottom one is the northern elevation. But it indicates that the overall scale and mass of the building is not dissimilar to existing surrounding development in the estate. And it also, its individual entrance doors also, whilst they're flats, can give the impression that it may be a pair of semi-detached houses or a small terrace of houses as opposed to flats. And just to give, again, a better idea of the elevational changes, it's not all flat elevations, there's a brief 3D model just to give an idea of how that would work and how the scale and mass of the building would work. So in terms of updates since the previous application, at the time I think the report was published, letters had already been sent out, and I'm aware that a number of neighbours, I was only made aware yesterday evening, a number of neighbours who had commented on the application didn't receive formal letters from us to say that the application was coming to committee this evening. However, we did receive their representation, so there's 4 further representations, so that should be 7 in total. Raising many of the previous comments of the others that are highlighted in the report, but also highlighting concerns with regards to increased noise, mentioning a covenant in relation to the Avery estate and the need for family housing, and also a request that should the application be approved, that the boundary between 15 Falcon Square and the application site ideally should be a brick wall. This is regarding concerns on highway safety, you could argue. The parking area on the other side of the boundary concerns that cars could accidentally come through the boundary if it's just a fence. So in terms of, say, the neighbours not being formally sent letters, this is just an unfortunate timing, effectively, in terms of timescales and when we need to have reports written in time to be published, and in terms of the timing of the committee and when the application was submitted. So the consultation period for neighbour comments expired on the 31st, I believe, of May, so that was almost a week ago now. But the letters were sent out on the 26th or 27th, and these 4 further representations received were between those 2 dates, hence why, and our policy is that we only write to those who have commented. So it's something we'll have to look at in future and to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I would say in the almost 20 years I've worked for Eastleigh, this is the first time it's happened to any applications I have, so it's just an unfortunate occurrence in terms of timings. In terms of the additional comments raised there, noise, the covenant and the boundary, in terms of noise, yes, there are gardens adjacent to the garden of number 13, but in planning terms, it would be no different to any other situation where you have adjoining neighbouring gardens. So in planning terms, increased noise couldn't be used as an issue to consider refusal of the application. In terms of the covenant that there may or may not be, that is separate legislation, that is separate to planning. If there is indeed a covenant that says you have to have houses as opposed to flats, that doesn't have anything to do with the planning side of things. That's a separate matter, so it doesn't prevent you from making a decision on the application this evening. And in terms of the boundary to number 15, that's something that could be looked at. But equally there are other measures that might not be quite so drastic, such as ensuring appropriate curb on the edge of the car parking or a barrier of some sort should cars accidentally, somebody hit the accelerator unexpectedly and come through. But it's something that could be addressed, and there is a condition with regards to landscape and boundary treatment, so it could be looked at as part of that. terms of other updates, still no response from our contaminated land experts, but they did comment on the previous application, and conditions were recommended, and those have been carried across. So the situation in terms of contaminated land won't have changed since November, so those same conditions apply. We do have a response from our ecologists, and they've raised an objection on the grounds that the ecological survey wasn't or isn't the most up-to-date that could be available. From a officer point of view, this is possibly a little harsh. The original survey, which was only done 18 months ago, showed there was very little habitat potential on the site, and it had little biodiversity value, and there is scope to, with redevelopment of the site, to include additional biodiversity measures and enhancements, and again there is a condition to that effect recommended. Southern Water have got back to me, but they've requested additional time to comment due to workload. However, they did comment again on the previous application, and they raised no issues. There are sewers that run through and drains that run through the service road, but none across the site. They were happy that the scheme could be connected up. And finally, Eastleigh Town Council have responded, and they've raised no objection to the application. So moving then on to considerations, the main points are we're in the urban edge and in an established residential area. Relevant policies in terms of local plan then are DA1, or DM1, sorry, which is the general coverall policy in terms of ensuring good quality design, limited impact on amenity and uses, ensuring development is appropriate to the character of the area, site context, etc., etc. Also of relevance is policy E10, which relates specifically to the Avery Estate Special Policy Area. And essentially, E10 is intended to ensure that any new development within the estate is appropriate and respects the existing characteristics of the estate, and that in terms of form, scale, materials, layout, etc. Also of relevance, obviously, the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, which encourages, amongst other things, best use of urban land. We've got a long disused site now that should have something done with it. But in simple terms, then, for the principle of development is acceptable, the principle of residential development is acceptable. The issue for yourselves this evening is the details of that being proposed and whether you consider it to be appropriate. As Liz mentioned earlier, one material consideration is any previous planning history related to the site. And as I say, there was a previous application on this site determined in November last year, so not too long ago, which was for 5 units in a 2.5, 3-storey block. That was refused by the committee on 5 grounds. Essentially, scale, height, design, layout, not in keeping with the characteristics of the Avery estate. Concerns with regards to overdevelopment of the site demonstrated by insufficient parking and insufficient amenity space provision for that scheme. I don't think they included any real amenity space or usable amenity space in that scheme. Insufficient parking also potentially leads to concerns with regards to overspill parking into the service road, and which would block access to the rear of many properties along Magpie Lane, Falcon Square, and so on. Concerns with regards to overlooking and loss of privacy, predominantly that was related to the 2nd floor accommodation of that scheme and overlooking towards the rear of properties in Magpie Lane. And it would overlook all their gardens straight into the back of those properties. It didn't meet our minimum requirements for that scenario. And the final 5th reason was failure to secure necessary mitigation towards recreational impact on New Forest and the solar. So that's more of a technical issue. So looking at those, may as well look at those each in turn, given they were the main issues that were highlighted by the committee. In terms of the Avery estate, as you've seen from the drawings, the general form, scale, design and materials are far more sympathetic to the Avery with this latest scheme. And the design is not a generic block of flats. It's been designed to look as if it could well be a set of houses, terraces or semis. And hopefully its overall form and scale should sit reasonably comfortably within the overall context of the estate. In terms of overlooking loss of privacy, we're now looking at a two-storey scheme. So we don't have that increased height that results in the overlooking. In terms of the necessary distances, back-to-back distances between properties, we're in excess of our 22 metres minimum standards. And I've already mentioned the condition in relation to the obscure glazed windows for one of the units at first floor. It's not to say that there wouldn't be some overlooking of gardens. That will be the case. The issue is whether any additional overlooking that would occur is unacceptable in planning terms. And given that most gardens are already overlooked to some degree by other neighbouring properties, given that it's all two-storey, that it's considered that the overlooking that would result from this scheme would be no worse than is the present situation amongst neighbouring properties. Say, with the exception of those two windows adjacent to number 13, but those have conditioned to be obscure glazed to preserve privacy. In terms of insufficient parking, the scheme proposes 6 spaces. I think the original scheme had 5, I think, from memory, for 5 units. This is 6 spaces for 4 units, which does meet the residential parking standards SPD for 50% or more unallocated parking. Ideally, though, small schemes like this don't always work brilliantly with completely unallocated parking, so the likelihood is that each unit will be allocated a single space, leaving 2 visitor spaces for visitors, including one of which would be disabled compliant. The layout's also is such that delivery vehicles and so on can pull completely off the service road onto the site, so thereby not blocking access to any neighbouring properties if you're getting a shopping delivery or a parcel delivered from Amazon or whatever it may be. Also as well, the site is in a pretty sustainable location, reasonably close to local facilities and within a not unreasonable distance of walking distance of Eastleigh Town Centre. So overall, whilst lower than the fully allocated standard required, it does meet the unallocated standard, and that will be something for members this evening to consider whether that is sufficient or not. Although I will say we can't really accommodate any additional parking on the site. In terms of overdevelopment and external amenity space provision and parking issues, so we've just commented on parking. In terms of external amenity space, there are 4 individual units, for, specific garden spaces effectively for each flat, which are over and above that would be required for a flat. Usually we require a balcony normally, so these are considerably larger than that. And actually it's quite a nice feature to have in a flatted development, an individual private garden. It's not something you often get. And in terms of the final reason for using the mitigation, so the applicant has agreed to secure the necessary mitigation should the committee be minded to approve this evening. In terms of other considerations then, which we need to go through, layout design, say, makes best use of an underused site, access parking highways, all deemed to be acceptable and no highway objections have been raised by the Highway Authority. In terms of amenity, whilst there will be an impact, inevitably, it's not to consider to be to any unacceptable extent on existing neighbours, and in terms of the amenity of future occupiers, it's over and above minimum standards and actually be quite a good quality scheme in that respect. Land contamination, so we have the conditions recommended from the previous application, which should be reiterated. Drainage, it can be secured and dealt with on site. In terms of ecology, despite the objection from our ecologist, there is scope to provide enhancements as part of the scheme, and again there's a condition to that effect requiring those to be agreed and implemented. And in terms of environmental sustainability, not only is it a sustainable location, there is scope to look at PV panels, electric charging for the car park areas and so on, but these are all issues that would normally now be dealt with the higher building regulation standards. So to conclude, we'll be glad to hear. Makes use of a currently underused site in a sustainable location, and I think in officer's view, it achieves a reasonable balance between deliverability and viability, and making best use of the site versus protecting the character of the locality and neighbouring occupiers and neighbouring uses. So again, in officer's view, it's considered to have acceptably addressed the concerns that the previous committee raised and is acceptable in all other policy and guidance requirements. And therefore the recommendation is to delegate back to the Service Director for Planning and Environment in conjunction with the Chair and the Vice Chair to approve the scheme, subject to the final outstanding consultee responses and securing those mitigation towards the Solent and new forest mitigation strategies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. So it's great that we've got people here today to speak. So I'd like to invite Vicky Postins up to the lectern to address the committee.
Thank you. Am I good to go? Hello, so I live at 13 Falcon Square. First of all, I just want to stress, as I did with the last application, that we're not actually against the plot of land being developed. We actually would really like it to be developed. It's currently an eyesore. It's also damaging our fences. We've got brambles growing through because the land's just not maintained. So we're not against it being developed, but we just, however, don't agree with these particular plans. Our first point is overdevelopment. We still think that 4 flats on a plot of that size is just too much. The other side of the square, as I saw on the screen, there is another set of houses, 2 3-bedroom houses, which were put on a similar sized plot, which work really well and are much more in keeping with the area and with the local community and would not be overdeveloped. Coming back again to insufficient parking, the previous application actually had 7 spaces, this one has 6, and there is still only 1 space per property. There isn't really anywhere else to park. There is a time limit at the shops during the day, so potentially there is going to be overflow into the service roads, and this has already been demonstrated. So less than 2 weeks ago, the developers put fencing around the plot. The access to the service road was blocked. I couldn't get out of the back gate. My husband couldn't access the workshop that he uses for work because the fencing company actually had blocked off the whole access for the day. So that was just one example already of how the service road is so narrow. On pictures, it looks like there's plenty of space, but realistically, there's just not the access that you think there is. My third point is loss of privacy. I appreciate the fact that there's a couple of obscured windows. However, there seems to be this idea that my trees and my garden completely obscure all views into my garden and into my property. I've just actually had a chat with the developers and found out, because I was trying to find out the distance, the rear of the properties are 10 metres from my house. I have a window there. There is no way that they won't be able to see in. They will be able to have access. They will be able to see into my kitchen, my children's playroom, and also my daughter's bedroom. I know that was mentioned about the loss of privacy is not going to be any different to what we have now. However, I will lose all privacy from my garden. The only privacy that I have at the moment from that direction, those in Magpie Lane can't actually see. However, a property that is 10 metres away will be able to see directly into my entire garden and also into my property. What I also wanted to raise about the noise disruption, I appreciate that they are garden spaces. However, we're going to have 4 against our fence line. We're also going to have increased vehicle access and also the noise, even just from fencing that we had from being done. So there's going to be a lot of noise increase for us, which will affect our quality of life. And I also wanted to mention about the sewage issues. I know that a couple of people have mentioned that. I know that Southern Water said there's no issues. However, they're not the ones that have raw sewage that come up in their garden regularly. And I know that a number of my neighbours have that also. So overall, I just wanted to say that we're not against the site being developed, but we just feel that 2 3-bedroom houses would be much more suitable for the site. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next I'd like to invite Dave Horwood to speak. Thank you.
Hi, we live at 15 Falcon Square. So we're against the plans for the following reasons. Firstly, the plans show that the car parking spaces is up against the boundary of number 15. And as you mentioned earlier, we're a little bit concerned should somebody accelerate when they don't mean to, they end up coming through our fence. So yes, we're looking for some sort of mitigation to that, whether it be bollards or some sort of barrier or a brick wall. We also wanted to address the concept of the privacy. I mean, you said yourself that it won't be any worse than normal, but actually because they're flats, the upstairs windows will be in living rooms. and kitchens where people will be during the day. Obviously, all the other existing houses at the moment, upstairs is bedrooms where people don't go until the end of the day, and therefore they're not overlooking the garden during the daytime. So I do believe it will be worse. We feel that the parking is insufficient still for the number that will be there, and therefore the overspill into local roads is still a problem as far as we're concerned. I'm also aware that the reason that the plan was turned down in November was largely due to the lack of them meeting the existing character of the area, and I think it was policy E10 that you mentioned. Obviously, the proposals are not houses; they are flats, and therefore they're not in keeping with Falcon Square. And we also, you mentioned about previous infill. Well, all of the previous infill, including everything that's still in construction at the moment, all of those are two-storey houses. None of them are apartments. So, we still feel that this is very much overdevelopment and not in keeping with the local surroundings. So, in summary, we're looking, if whatever goes ahead, we would like to have a brick wall put between the existing properties and the car parking spaces. We feel that any upstairs windows, if they're living rooms, they should all have obscured glass in them, rather than just the two that have currently got that listed. And we do feel the parking issue needs to be addressed as well. The ideal solution, as Vicky said, because we're not against development, the ideal solution is 2 semi-detached houses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So only two people registered to object, but there's lots more people here, so I don't know if anybody else would like to stand up and say anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Parkinson. I live at 40 Magpie Lane. You heard a lot from me last time because this development is right behind my house. I haven't objected this time, but equally I'm mindful of all the issues that my neighbours have raised. Slightly selfishly, it has moved further away. It's a much better design than it was. I quite like the fact that there's going to be a parking entrance right behind my house. It makes it much easier to get out of my property as long as nobody is blocking that. But I'm very conscious that alleyway is a lot narrower than it perhaps looks on a plan. I have to swing very tightly to get into the alleyway out of my parking space. People coming out of this site will have to swing very tightly into that alleyway. If somebody is walking down the road, and I had a lady with 5 children in tow the other day, if somebody comes out quickly, they have nowhere to go. And while I commend the design with the lower planting and things, I think a little bit more space around the edge, just to allow people a bit of breathing space to avoid pedestrians, give them somewhere to go, is critical. I also do think, I'm aware that it's a hard parking surface. I do think something better drainage, more permeable, is something that should be thought of. So I'd just like to raise kind of those issues. I think it's not so much the parking, it's the vehicle movements in the alley that are of concern to people, but also the water runoff drainage from the hard parking site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd now like to invite Mr. Ian Humble to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name's Ian Humble. I'm Head of Planning at Doswell Projects Limited. We're a SME house builder based locally in Chandler's Ford. We've prepared and submitted the application on behalf of Eastleigh Borough Council, who obviously own the site, and we would act as contractor for the local authority if the application is successful. As Gary mentioned, we tried really hard over the last couple of months to try and address each of the individual reasons for refusal, which I'll just run through here. The first reason for refusal, as we've heard, related to design concerns. So as part of that, we've reduced the number of units from 5 to 4, which has allowed us to bring the storey height down to a true 2-storey level. So we've got a more domestic scale, which is more akin to the established pattern of development in the area, whereas the previous scheme was designed to look and read very much like a block of apartments. The scheme's no higher than the adjacent properties, and importantly, we've not included any dormer windows this time round, which, for reasons of design and overlooking, we just felt was completely inappropriate, to be honest. So we've tried to design this scheme to read as a little terrace of units or a pair of semi-detached units rather than an apartment block, and we felt that's really important to respect the character of the Avery estate and its special policy area, with the projecting gables, matching materials, and some of the other bits and pieces that Gary picked up on before. The reasons for refusal 2 and 3 related to the potential overdevelopment of the plot. As I've mentioned, we have reduced the number of units from 5 to 4 to try and address that issue. We've also managed to give each individual apartment a good usable area of amenity space, which rightly or wrongly is quite uncommon on apartment schemes. In addition to that, we've managed to provide 6 parking spaces at the other end of the site, which, again, as Gary mentioned, would allow 1 parking space for each apartment plus 2 spaces for visitors. Looking at the middle super output area and the data associated with that, our highway consultant in particular has concluded that that would be adequate to avoid overspill parking in the local area, which I appreciate to local people, including the guys here today, is really important. Reason for refusal 4 was specifically related to the impact on the living conditions of number 40 and 42 Magpie Lane in terms of overlooking. We're now achieved a separation distance of 25 metres between opposing 2-storey elevations, which exceeds the requirements in the Quality Spaces SPD, so we're confident that there shouldn't be any undue overlooking of 40 and 42 Magpie Lane. I know one of the ladies that spoke is concerned about overlooking of her property, which we fully appreciate, and I think we're certainly open to the 2 windows being obscure glazed to make sure the most private area of that garden and the windows on the back aren't overlooked to an unacceptable level. So again, we've looked to try and pick up on some of the concerns raised previously to come up with a scheme, albeit it will result in an element of change for residents, which we appreciate. And as an occupier, is sometimes it raises concerns. We really have tried to get to a point where those issues and impacts won't be unacceptable. And finally, on the last reason for refusal, which related to the impact on the European protected sites, we'll address that through the purchase of nitrate credits and by making financial contributions, as Gary alluded to. So in summary, we truly have tried really hard to address all the previous reasons for refusal, and we personally feel that this development could make a really attractive addition to the Avery estate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll now open it up to councillors for questions. So any questions from councillors, please? Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few. Do you want them all at once, or should we do them one at a time? Ooh, good half dozen. Okay, right. The first one I want to address is, and I'm addressing it now because this is the only place in the actual meeting that we can address it, and that's with reference to the boundary of the car parking against number 15. And obviously this is based on if, as we go through the meeting, members are minded to accept, but we don't know that at this stage, but this is the only point I can address it. So I've got an issue in North Stoneham where there is a car park separated from a garden with just a fence, and it was missed on the master planning, and it is a real concern because obviously you mentioned if somebody hits the accelerator, well, there's a lot more people these days that have automatic cars, and of course when people, there's a lot more electric cars as well, and they only have a forward and reverse. So I do see a car park up against a fence, and the only protection being a wooden fence, a real safety issue. I'm not so sure brick wall is necessarily the answer, because that would have to be a pretty reinforced substantial brick wall to actually, otherwise you could end up with the potential of the brick wall being knocked over. However, some sort of metal barrier, similar to what you get on motorways, but perhaps not quite so heavy duty because you don't need it, but you get the idea, along that boundary, purely from a safety point of view. The question is it would need to be conditioned to ensure that it happens, rather than, if members are minded to accept this, discuss later when actually we won't potentially be able to do it. So I would like to propose that that is put in as a condition on a safety measure, I say purely from experience of actually having seen another site, that the protection is just a wooden fence. So can that be done?
Yes, if you deem it fit this evening that we can add an additional condition in there. Probably better to do it as an additional condition because it's on a very specific issue and a specific reason, as opposed to add it into the standard landscape condition. Yes, we could have a brick wall. The other benefit of a brick wall is less noise transmission as well. Although it's a relatively small car park, there wouldn't be that many movements back and forth out of it. But yes, I'm sure there will be, the only issue will be we probably can't get the tree planting that's shown in there, but because it's fairly tight to have any built structure there. But that may be something that you're willing to sacrifice, if you like, in order to address the potential safety issue. But yes, I think we exactly what the measure would be, that would be for the developer to come up with something. But we could certainly add additional condition in there, so it might be something you want to move as part of the debate later.
I think that there needs to be a condition for a safety barrier. If the application, if members are minded to approve, then possibly in conjunction or in consultation with the owners of number 15. I have concerns of a brick wall because it would prevent the trees, and depending on how hard a car hit a brick wall is not necessarily guaranteed to stop a car. It might stop it going through, but an SUV might be heavy enough to actually topple the brick wall, whereas a metal barrier ought to be able to stop. And that would be my only concern on a brick wall. But having said that, I do take into account the fact that a brick wall would also help with the noise that's been mentioned as well. I guess the reality of what is, I'm not skillful enough to know what the safest option would be, but I would definitely like a condition, or as you say, a condition of a condition, that a safety measure is put in there to prevent cars crossing from the car park into the garden. And also, if it turns out that it is just a wooden fence, it protects a wooden fence and it doesn't continually have to be repaired. So that's the first question and the first point.
Yeah, I say I'm sure we can add a condition in. You'll have to move it in addition to the existing recommendation, but part of that would be to agree the wording. So I can't come up with the exact wording here and now. I can't multitask that well. But we could agree the wording at a later date as part of delegating it back.
Well, I'll leave the moving reminder bit for the staff that are watching to remind the chair when we get there. And make a note of it. Okay, in no particular order, I want to have... you've got it there. So can you just point out, because I didn't see your mouse cursor, and I still can't.
As soon as I stop, it stops. Yeah, it's not appearing at all.
Right. I'd like. The question is the clarity on the window? There we go. Yeah. All right. Is the clarity on the windows that are overlooking 13 where they're positioned? Having had a look, it appears to me if they're on the left-hand side of that diagram.
I'll jump quickly to the floor plan. So this is the ground floor, so there are no issues. We've got the boundary fence. Upstairs we have a kitchen window and a bathroom window. Those are recommended to be obscure glazed.
Yeah.
And then I have a bedroom window, a living space window, and a further kitchen window. Now they are all on this western elevation, all through here. So the two obscure glazed windows are approximately here. Where the pointer is. The idea being that whilst ideally we wouldn't want to obscure glaze all the windows along that side, because a living room or a bedroom with obscure glazing is not the most attractive spaces to be in. But we want to ensure that we protect as best possible, we always endeavour to protect the best possible, the more private part of the garden, if you like, which is usually immediately adjacent to the house. That's where most people have a patio. It's where you would sit out to eat. It's where you would have a barbecue in most instances. It's also the area that can't be overlooked by any adjoining immediate neighbours. The bottom of the garden can be overlooked by neighbours and so on. So the area adjacent to the house is what we try to preserve as best possible. And that's the intention that
Okay,
that
yeah. So they're
those
obscured.
obscure areas. It's not an ideal solution by any means, but I think it's the best solution we can probably come up with.
Okay, so moving up to the living room window, which is a bit above on the bit that sticks out a little bit. Okay, so that would not be obscured. So now how from there are the minimum distances calculated on overlooking? Because we're now perpendicular to number 13.
The SPD, in terms of minimum distances, are for directly facing windows. So exactly, or back to back usually. It's a back-to-back distance of 22 metres. Where you have a situation where it's perpendicular effectively, you will be able to overlook, but the idea is we try to prevent accidental or occasional view out. So your main view out, just looking out the window, if you stuck your head out the window and looked left or right, yes, you would be able to see, but that's not what we're trying to protect. We're just trying to protect everyday occasional use. So if you were sat in that living room of that flat, sat down watching telly and you're looking out the window, are you going to be looking at or through a neighbour's window at such a distance that your privacy and their privacy would be impacted unacceptably? So in this instance, I think the distances we've got there and the fact that we're perpendicular, so 45 degrees effectively, the view out there and the windows themselves, the general views of both of these are at 90 degrees to each other. So it's not to say there won't be any overlooking, but the back of the house should be acceptably protected by virtue of the orientation of both windows and the distances between them. Have a look at the plans then. We have 2 living room windows on the front. There are none on the southern elevation, so none directly facing number 15. There are a pair of living room windows, and the rest are bedroom and bathroom windows. So those 2 living room windows are here, where the pointer is. Now, yes, there will be views down into the garden of number 15. There won't be any views into the property itself, but again, the views looking that way, in planning terms, are no worse than the views that the existing attached property to number 15 has of number 15's garden. So, again, in planning terms, there would be no unacceptable overlooking.
Another question, this one's a really quick one. Where are the bins collected from and how, please?
Each individual garden area has a place for bins to be stored individually for each flat, and then there's a small alley that runs down through here, a little passageway to a communal collection point at the end, and so bin lorries come down, as I believe they do at present, to collect the rubbish and then back out to Nightingale again. Yeah, but it could be added into the existing bin collection.
Thank you. I think that's it for the moment. I'll just scan my scribblings to see if there's anything else while somebody else has a go.
Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you. Listening to the lady over there earlier talking about the access road being very narrow, how would that, if there was an emergency situation, you had to have emergency vehicles, would they be able to get through?
Yeah, the access way to the rear of the Magpie Lane properties is quite narrow. It's probably just wide enough for an ambulance or a fire engine to get through. I think the lady's issue was turning around at the corner here. But the access road, my understanding, is past the shops, and along the back of the shops is a bit wider than the rest of it. So they would, because it's intended for deliveries to the back of the shops and so on. So a larger vehicle. So in terms of access to this development, yes, fire appliances, ambulances could access without any issue. Other properties, of course, they've got their own front, either onto Falcon Square itself or Magpie Lane. So this rear access is not the only access to the existing neighbouring properties, it's a secondary rear access, whereas it would be the only access to this scheme.
Councillor Irish.
Thank you, Chair. I believe at the last meeting we talked about the possibility of 2 houses on this site. Was that ever considered when another scheme was being thought about?
Not to my knowledge, but that's not what you have before you this evening. What you've got to consider is this scheme. It's not to say that a pair of semis wouldn't be an unacceptable solution, but that's not what's before you this evening.
Any more questions? Or are we going to... Oh, Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, you mentioned the possibility of EV charging points being put in, which is great, should absolutely happen. Were solar panels considered at any point during the process?
Since building regulations improved last year, and they're much higher standards than they used to be, those sort of measures have to be included as part of any new build. Hence why we no longer, in planning terms, ask for those requirements, because what we have in policy terms isn't as strict as is required under building regulation. In terms of building regulations, there is a requirement for EV charging points. How exactly it would be set up, I imagine that there could be just a single point set up between the middle spaces, which all 4 spaces could then, or allocated to each flat, could easily plug into if required, and the infrastructure needs to be put in place there ready for future use. In terms of solar panels, yeah, there's probably scope to add PV panels onto elements of the roofs. The east and west roofs are the biggest, so they could be added on, but again, they're not the only way of achieving the necessary requirements in terms of building regulations.
Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. I found another couple. It's actually to do with the conditions as written in the report. So I'm actually just looking at, it's pretty much one of the first pages, but it's actually page 10. It's conditions B, the arrangement for the routing, turning of lorries and details of construction traffic to the site, and C that goes with it, the arrangement for deliveries associated with all construction works, loading, unloading of plant materials and restoration of any damage to the highway. This needs to take into account the school times. So we would, and we have done it before. We did it with, what's the new one on Toynbee? The name I can't remember. Canada Court, because of Toynbee School. We actually conditioned that deliveries weren't able to come on site between, I don't know, 8 or 9, 3 till 4, because actually, whilst this is not near a school, I think we all know how busy Nightingale Avenue becomes in the school run. Obviously, you've got the shop there, which attracts school children and parents, and they are quite busy times. The last thing we're going to want is mixing very large vehicles into the mix at those times. There's also the times when people are actually going to work as well, and that. So I think we need to be mindful and somehow condition the times that what will be some large lorries will actually be coming on site, so that we don't have a conflict of small children, people going to work, and lorries. So that's the first one on B and C. I've got one more, but I'll let you deal with B and C first.
In terms of, yes, we have applied restrictions in terms of when deliveries can take place, certainly around school times, but then normally, as you say, on sites like Toynbee Road, where the site was directly opposite the primary and infant school, or primary school, isn't it? It's not infant school. There are no schools, to my knowledge, immediately adjacent to the site here. Yes, I take the point in terms of school kids using the newsagents and so on there, but I think part of the reason for the previous conditions on Toynbee is that, yeah, you're going to have HGVs around large groups of kids, potentially, and parents and vehicles dropping off. Here, I think it would be harder to argue that it's necessary. If we're applying a condition, it has to meet a certain number of tests, and one of those, part of that test is that it has to be necessary. In this instance, I think that we would have to agree that any deliveries, loading, offloading has to take place on site, so we don't want to block the rear service road and that sort of thing. But I think it's likely to be that in terms of impact on highway safety, which is another reason for limiting the hours of deliveries, essentially a delivery lorry will pull off the road. They're going to be well off the road here. It's not like they're going to be loading or unloading on the highway or anything like that. So we could add it in, but it would have to be added into the condition or revise the condition in terms of permitted working hours, or we add in additional condition in relation to deliveries can only take place between X time and Y time. But to my mind, I don't think it's entirely necessary, and I don't think it's entirely reasonable in terms of the planning side of things. However, it might be something that the developer is happy to go along with, and you could apply it into the condition anyway.
Well, I'm looking at the developer. Because, whilst it is right that, there is no school adjacent and close by, there's still a lot of school traffic. And, it's also the main bus route as well. All of us know that Nightingale Avenue at the school run time is very, very busy. And you don't really want to be adding in a brick lorry or a brick lorry to the mix, really. I don't know, it's up to the chair and Gary, I guess.
If it gets us an answer, then yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
From my perspective, I think for a site this size, the deliveries would be relatively limited anyway. So I think within reason, if the times are restricted, then we can certainly have a conversation about what that looks like and work with that. I wouldn't want it to be an unnecessarily stumbling block if there are concerns about children walking along the alleyway, etc. So I'm happy to agree to that in principle, subject to agreeing the exact detail.
Thank you. Could it not just be written into the CME plan?
Well, we can either specify some specific times that deliveries can't happen, or you add it into the CMP condition method to ensure limited conflict between school children or something like that. Yeah, we could potentially do that. Then you're not specifying particular times then, and you're then leaving it up to officers then to determine what would or wouldn't be deemed acceptable.
In conjunction with the chair and the vice chair?
Yes.
Which means that it wouldn't need to be moved.
Well, we'd need to move it to add it into the condition, but that condition would need to be approved at a later date, a discharge of that condition. That process is down to officers. That's not, the members would not get involved at that stage. So if you have to do it, we can make a note and go, okay, we'll make sure that school times are taken into account in terms of deliveries. It won't be as enforceable as a condition that specifically says thou shalt not undertake any deliveries between these hours, and it would be purely not voluntary, but it would still have to be tied into a delivery methodology, if you like, as part of that overall construction management condition.
I think that sounds reasonable. It can be, sorted out at a later date rather than actually be totally restrictive. We didn't do it with the other corner of Falkland Road and Falkland Square. There was no, we did at all there. But I say this one, because of the shop, is a little bit more, prominent. And the very last one is the parking of vehicles of site operatives. because this is not a permit parking zone. So it's free public highway, anyone can park anywhere. It's the law of the highway. But obviously parking, we know in the over estate is quite restricted. Is there anything that could be done to perhaps not so much during the week is such an issue because people are at work, there is more street parking available, but Saturday mornings there isn't. And obviously the permitted times of work allow work on a Saturday morning when the residents are all parked, although I guess they'll be parked first, so the developer won't have anywhere to be able to park. It is a consideration, or is that just going to be being overzealous given the fact that it's free public highway?
It will be a tricky one to do. As you say, it's free public highway. Anybody's entitled to park on the highway, provided their vehicles, MOT, taxed, etc. Within the condition, it does talk about where contractors would park. Ideally, you park as many as you can on site, but it's not always possible. There may be ways that car sharing and so on like that, or it's agreed that contractors will park in another area and then share a van or a car. It's like, and as Ian says, it's not that big a site. There wouldn't be that many contractors on there at any one time. Obviously, there'll be periods where there'll be more or less. But we're not talking like a big site like the Toynbee site, the old police station site, where you'd have quite a number of contractors on at any one time. So ideally, most contractors could park on site, but I say if they're entitled to park on the public highway, then so be it, and they're allowed to do that. We can obviously ask that it's done in a considerate manner, and that's something that the developer and site foreman would have to manage.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all my questions, and I guess the parking will come down to Ian wanting to be a good developer and neighbour at the same time, should this be granted. Thank you, Chair.
All right, last call for questions. Okay, could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Park, and could I have a seconder? Councillor Bicknell? Okay, we now move on to debate. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. So I looked at this with interest, and I really do welcome the change from the 2.5 straight 3 floors down to 2. I think that's a real good improvement. And generally, how the design, I think Gary mentioned how it wasn't just a cookie-cutter design, it's actually done specific to that site. And I think it's really improved the scheme overall, especially with respect to how it fits into its surroundings. I welcome the improved parking provision, and especially the gardens for each flat. It's not something that's been said, as Gary said, that you see quite often. And I think that will just really improve the look and feel for any future residents that move in, should it go ahead. And finally, I do support Paul's proposed condition regarding the mitigation measures between the car park and number 15 Falcon Square. So I'm very pleased to see the improvements that's been made so far.
Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, as Councillor Park said, I think this is a massively improved scheme on the whole. It does what it needs to do, keeps generally within the area, but also does provide that extra bit of density and those few extra properties which are absolutely needed. It's unfortunate there are still some overlooking parts to the scheme, but compared to the previous proposal that we saw, again, it's a huge improvement. And I think all the obscuring window parts that have gone in will hopefully mitigate that to the best that they can. So yeah, on the whole, I think it's a much improved scheme, and yeah, quite impressed by it.
Councillor Beer.
Echoing Councillors Spencer and Park, I mean, you know, kind of obviously I was one of the ones who voted to reject this last time. There were obviously many reasons for that, and I think that on the whole, a lot of these have been completed and answered. One of the things that came up last time was obviously the fence between the parking and the next door neighbour's garden. Obviously that's still happening in this one. And I completely agree with Councillor Bicknell in regard to whether it's bollards or more kind of serious structure between the garden and the parking. We greatly appreciated, but I think this is an overall vast improvement on what was presented to us in November, and overall very supportive of it.
Oh, Councillor Irish.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with my colleagues. It's certainly a better scheme than we had in November. I wouldn't say it was an ideal scheme for the residents. I don't think it's really addressed all their concerns, but I don't know. I mean, what else can we get there? So I suppose we've really got to live with it, really, haven't we?
Councillor Beer.
To be fair, we never said ideal. we never said ideal. We said vastly improved. Yeah.
Councillor Mann.
Yeah, I think looking at it, it's been improved quite a bit, because it was really bad having 3 stories. But end of the day, we got to do something with the fence where the parking is. So I think a barrier would be better, rather than if somebody goes into a wall and knocks the wall over and there's kids sitting there or something. It'll be a lot better, metal barrier, I reckon.
Yeah, so, as we're not technical experts, I was thinking that we should propose something along the lines of adding a condition for a safety measure to be added between the car park and the garden that is then determined by experts, because we shouldn't be here saying it should be a wall or it should be a barrier. I think it should be determined, but we're agreeing that we put a condition in for a safety measure. Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would agree with that, but just with the addition of the word acceptable safety, because it just, we make sure it is acceptable. And can I go on now to debate?
Did you want to move that? Do we want to move that to add it and then keep going? Because we're going to have to vote on the...
Yeah, I'm happy to move that. Let me know when I can add my penny's worth for the debate, but I'll happily move that wording.
So we'll move to add the condition for an acceptable safety measure to be added between the car park and the garden. Okay, so Councillor Bicknell's proposed it and Councillor Beers seconded it. Do we need any more debate on that? Then we can go to the vote. So all those in favour? Right, so that now becomes a condition of the main motion. Okay, so we're now back to debating the main motion that now includes the barrier. So, Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say to the residents present that you have my sympathies. In the not too distant future, I am going to have a bigger development at similar distances behind my house. I'm not allowed to take part in that debate in any way, shape or form, or be involved in that process and that planning application whatsoever. Okay, so I just wanted to set my stall out before I actually start with the actual debate. And obviously last time there were a number of issues with the last application. And one of the big ones was, and obviously I said it here, that the Avery estate, when it was laid out, etc., 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 is this policy E10, which actually goes on to protect the characteristics of the Avery estate. What it doesn't mean is that it doesn't replicate. It just protects the characteristics. As Gary said, with the design, materials, picking up certain features, gabled ends, sloping roofs, 2 stories and such like. It doesn't dictate the size of gardens, and it doesn't dictate whether flats can be part of the mix or either. There are already flats on the estate. There's obviously Wren Road, and there is a house that's converted at the top of Raven into 2 flats there. So, in my view, and having looked at the design and being vehemently against the last application, being completely not in keeping with the estate. Looking at this design and taking policy E10, I'm of the view that it does meet that criteria and meets the characteristics of the estate with the design and the brick and such like. The other issue, I mean, I've asked questions about the overlooking, and as I say, I'm going to be in a very similar situation in the not too distant future. Yeah, there is the potential of some overlooking, not necessarily direct back-to-back, as Gary explained. But planning is a balance. It is very rare, hardly ever, black and white. And as councillors, we have a quasi-judicial role to determine a planning application, taking into account planning evidence, planning legislation, listening to residents, and weighing all that up. And so therefore there are some times where, because it's a balancing act, balancing means compromise, that you have to weigh up what's the sort of, not the greater need, but the pitfalls and the merits of an application. Now obviously this application is going to provide homes for people that are on the waiting list. Now it's been mentioned that, or it has been mentioned in the past that 3-bedroom properties are needed. But actually, on the housing waiting list, the vast numbers of people that are waiting for 1 and 2 bed actually outweigh those that are waiting for 3-bed house 3 times. It's roughly about 940-ish people on the waiting list for a 1-bed, about 500 for 2-bed, about 400 for a 3-bed. So you have 3 times as many people waiting for 1 and 2 bed properties than you do 3 beds. And obviously part of the National Planning Policy Framework that we are governed by as councillors, in our quasi-judicial role, is actually looking at use of the land and what's and best use of the land. And taking into account housing need, then it is 1 and 2 bed. Because based on those numbers. It is difficult. It is, planning applications, especially when they are close to other people's properties, are really straightforward. And I can understand why residents don't necessarily agree with it and would want something else. But when you actually look at the planning policies, so I've mentioned policy E10, but even policy DM1, where no unacceptable impact on residents, amenities, character of area. You have to weigh up what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And I'm of the view that the impacts are not totally unacceptable. There are no covenants on the estate at all. And in other areas there have been, in effect, garden grabs. Okay, this one's not a garden, but in Greenfinch and Linnet, there are infills and garden grabs as well. And actually, those properties are less of a character of the estate than this one, in my view. So overall, it is an improvement on last time, and taking all those factors into account, then I would be minded with the safety issue taken into account, comments by residents at number 15 with the car park. I would be minded to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further debate, councillors? No, so I don't want to repeat what's gone on before, but it does a much improved looking scheme. It looks like 2 houses. It's got a few more front doors, but it's actually got the same amount of bedrooms as the 2 houses. It's got 6 bedrooms, which two 3-bedroom houses would have. So it does fit into the character of the area, and like we've said, it's going to provide some much needed housing, and it just looks so much better. It doesn't look like a block of flats, which is really good. So Yeah, I'd be pleased to support it. Okay, so we will now go to the vote then. All those in favour? So that's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you very much for all attending. You're welcome to stay now for the next bit, or you're welcome to go, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to item 8, is the planning application for land at Handsway car park in the town centre. Construction of 4 two-bedroom and 2 one-bedroom apartments. So I'd like to ask Gary to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, another scheme that the committee saw back in November. Deja vu again. Yes, this is a scheme for the Handsway car park in Eastleigh Town Centre for proposed construction of 4 two-bed, 2 one-bed apartments in a 2- and 3-storey block with ancillary amenity space, landscaping, bin and cycle storage. You'll probably know the site well, so it's the existing Handsway car park on the corner of Wells Place and Handsway. We've got High Street here to the east, Swan Centre opposite, and the Wells Place Centre opposite. We've also got to the western side, the rear of Desborough Road properties, and immediately to the north of the site is the electrical substation. And then to the east, you have the essentially Handsway, which acts as the service road for properties on High Street or businesses on High Street. Existing site, say, all tarmacked car park at the moment, all surrounded by development. So this was a similar scheme was looked at by ELAC in November and wasn't deemed acceptable. But again, this is a completely fresh scheme. There are similarities because it's the nature of the site. You're going to get similar overall scheme, but it's not a rehash or an amended version of the scheme that the committee previously considered unacceptable. So in terms of general layout, say we're on the corner of Handsway and Wells Place, 2- and 3-storey block, located centrally. If you remember, there are a number of sewer easements across this site which limit how much of the site can actually be developed. So there's one that runs along the eastern boundary, and there's also one that cuts diagonally across the bottom corner of the site as well. So no development can take place within those sewer easements, so that limits how much the site can actually be developed. So the block's in the middle, surrounded by landscaped area. There's a small amenity space along the north, and there's a separate secure bin and cycle storage building along the northern edge, which can be accessed via Handsway, and there's another service road there that runs to the rear of the Desborough Road properties. There's also scope within this scheme to widen the pavement on the corner. You might, I don't know, it shows up on the photographs so well, but this existing corner here, the car park juts into the pavement, if you like, whereas the pavement, the radius, so it actually gets very narrow at that point. This gives scope to actually increase the width of that pavement there, which would mean that pedestrian crossing of the Handsway would be easier to do. And this is quite an important east-west link to the remainder of the town, if you like, and almost like a gateway site into the town centre proper. So in terms of scheme's layout, ground first floor would be a pair of 2-bedroom units on each floor, and then on the second floor a pair of 1-bedroom units. Ground floor entrance is on the corner of the building. The previous scheme had the entrance halfway up along Hans Way. So this is corner entrance, one 2-bed unit here, another 2-bed unit here. Same arrangement on the next floor up, but the entrance area becomes a balcony, inset balcony, and then on the upper level again, that becomes another balcony for the upper floor levels. There's also balconies to the rear units tucked up on the north-eastern corner, and ground floor there, small terrace areas. One significant change of the scheme is, if you recall, one of the main concerns of the previous scheme was impact on future residents of the development from disturbance caused by the neighbouring commercial uses, so noise, odours, etc. The main way that this has been addressed within this scheme is by moving all the sensitive accommodation, i.e. bedrooms, to the opposite side of the building, so to the western side of the building. So most disturbance happens to the east of the building, so all the bedrooms have been moved to the west with living areas and the stairwell to the east. So this means these sensitive rooms are kept away from the source of noise as best possible. That does raise some issues in terms of potential overlooking of the Desborough Road properties to the west. However, that's been addressed. There are some windows which I'll show you on the elevations in a minute, but they're high level. But these bedrooms do have good sized windows which again are perpendicular, so they don't directly look at the rear of Desborough Road windows, they look north and south. So these windows won't be lit just by a small high-level window. They'll have a proper-sized window that will provide a good outlook and good daylight to them. And it also means that, as you can see, this elevation steps. The previous one was pretty much flat and straight, and that was a further concern raised, I believe, by Councillor Bicknell and the previous application, the outlook for Desborough Road properties. But this one is stepped, mainly to provide decent bedroom or windows to these bedrooms, but it also helps provide a bit of articulation to that elevation. Doesn't come across so well in the elevation. So this down here is the Desborough Road onto the rear of the Desborough Road properties. It looks a bit flat and 2D, but in reality, this is the most forward. This then sets back. This then sets back again. So it's a stepped elevation. The upper floor also steps back as well. So that elevation is articulated, so helps to reduce its visual mass and bulk, and also provide some visual interest. The clad upper floor as well helps to visually make the building appear less tall than it is. So you've only got 2-storey brickwork presented to Desborough Road as effectively a roof above, if you like. In terms of the other elevations then, this is the Hans Way elevation. As you can see here, detail elements with projecting brickwork details, deep set window reveals, you've got inset balconies and so on. So there's, again, quite not as articulated as the other elevation, but there's more going on here in terms of scope to have windows, etc. This is the northern elevation, which won't be viewed hugely because that's onto the substation to the rear, but there will be views as you come down Hans Way towards Wells Place. And then this is the Wells Place elevation, and that elevation's actually curved. It doesn't show so well on here, but I do have some other images that demonstrate that more clearly. This then shows the relationship between the rear of Desborough Road properties and the heights, if you like, that they have, and the distances. So as you can see there, whilst there will be an impact, as there would have been with the previous scheme, the issue is whether it's an unacceptable impact or not. And in officers' views, the distances we have here are not uncommon in a tight urban town centre locale. We got the setback of the upper floor, so there should be no adverse loss of light, no overshadowing of gardens. Of course, there will be at certain times of the morning when the sun's low in the sky and it's across the east, but by mid-morning, at most times of the year, those gardens will receive adequate sunlight. And again, this bottom one is a bit of a street scene along Wells Place, that shows the scale of the building, if you like, in relation to neighbouring development. And then just for completeness, I need to show you the bin and cycle storage, which is a small building at the back. But these will be the images that give a better impression of the building. These are fully rendered CGI images, photorealistic images of what the building would look like were it to be built. So this one is looking northwest from Wells Place. So this is Wells Place through here, Desborough Road just out of shot, and this is up into Hands Way. This is the substation to the rear. This is the increased pavement there. So you can see the curve of the building there. You can see the oversailing roof and how the shadow and so on is cast across the building and provides interest. And then this image is from the opposite corner, if you like, looking northeast. So this is Hands Way, just tucking up through there, and this is from Wells Place again, and this is the back of Desborough Road, Property LA Nails there. And you can see here this curved elevation more clearly on the Wells Place elevation. And it also shows that the stepping of this western elevation onto Desborough Road. So they won't have the whole elevation close to me. It steps back to alleviate the visual mass of the building. So in terms of updates since the report was written, there's one further representation received, but not raising any further or new issues that aren't already listed within the report. Again, no response from our land contamination specialist, but they did comment on the previous scheme, and those conditions recommended previously are reiterated within the latest recommendation. Haven't had a response from our landscape officer, but we do have standard landscape condition, details of landscape to be provided, although, as I said, soft landscaping is going to be fairly limited given the easement constraints. We're not, unfortunately, going to be allowed to plant any trees within those easements. Southern Water won't allow us to do that, but there will be scope to have low-level planting and so on there that can provide some defensible space for those ground floor residential units from back of pavement. We have received a response from Natural England, who unsurprisingly have objected on the grounds of their usual grounds of impact on New Forest and Solent, but as you're probably aware, they're objecting to pretty much every residential scheme at the moment. But the council, as the appropriate authority, can not overrule them, but we can essentially still approve the scheme where you're minded to, even with their objection, because ultimately we are the determining authority, or yourselves are the determining authority this evening. In terms of other updates then, nothing from Hampshire Swifts, and nothing from Southern Water, although they did previously comment on the original scheme and requested conditions in relation to protection of the existing sewers, and those conditions are again reiterated. Again, no response from the Electricity Board. Eastleigh Town Council have responded, and they've objected on the grounds of the loss of the car park and the wider impact that may well have. And we've had no response from the Eastleigh Business Improvement District team to this latest application. So in terms of the key points, within the urban edge, we're within the town centre, or more specifically the secondary zone within the Eastleigh town centre, where policies E3 and DM22 apply. They specifically, or DM22, relates to ensuring appropriate changes of use predominantly within the town centre, and E3 relates more specifically to Eastleigh town centre as a whole, and highlights specific points within the town centre where certain works are looking to be undertaken, although it doesn't include this site. Also resonant relevance is policy DM1, which we mentioned earlier, which is, say, that general cover-all policy, and the MPPF, which, amongst other things, highlights the importance of an appropriate range of uses for town centres, certainly post-COVID and the troubles town centres have been having even prior to that, and residential accommodation within a town centre is one of those uses deemed appropriate and encouraged to some extent, where a good level of accommodation can be provided. So in basic terms then, the principle of redeveloping the site is acceptable, and as always, it's for yourselves to determine whether the details of the scheme are acceptable or not. Again, with the previous scheme that we just looked at this evening, Nightingale, the earlier version of this, an earlier version on this site, not of this scheme, but a previous scheme, was refused, and those main reasons were impact on the future occupiers of the development from those adjoining commercial uses predominantly in terms of noise, odour, etc., and general disturbance. Concern with regards to the impact on the outlook from the rear of Desborough Road properties and the occupiers of those properties. Essentially a design, concerns on the design of the previous scheme and what was considered to be a failure to appropriately address the street scene or visually enhance the townscape. The other predominant reason was loss of easily accessible disabled parking within the existing Handsway car park. And the final one was failure to secure that mitigation, but again, that's more of that technical reason. So again, we'll look through those in more detail as they were considered to be the main issues. So the main issues in terms of amenity for future residents was that it hadn't been demonstrated to the committee's satisfaction that the disturbance resulting from the commercial uses, restaurants, takeaways, etc., along Handsway, the various Deliveroo drivers, etc., and mopeds, Pizza Hut mopeds flying back and forth, that residents could be protected from those disturbances to an adequate extent without resorting to quite drastic mechanical ventilation methods, sealed windows, etc., and is concerned that the quality of environment for those residents wouldn't be ideal, to say the least. As I said at the beginning, this is a completely redesigned scheme. The main change being to the internal layout, which pushes all those sensitive rooms, bedrooms, away from the source of noise. So the fact that there's a whole building between those bedrooms and the facade of the building so on, will protect them to a reasonable degree. It is proposed that there may well be a requirement for some form of mechanical ventilation, and certain windows may well need to be fixed shut on the northern boundary adjacent to the substation, but those are backups rather than essentials. Majority of the time, our environmental health team are satisfied that you'll be able to open a window as per normal should you need to. But if it does get too much, you can close the window and you've got the mechanical ventilation there to ensure appropriate air changes and so on there. But it's not like you're in a hermetically sealed environment only relying on the mechanical ventilation. And so it's the scheme as presented now has been reviewed in detail by environmental health, and they're satisfied that actually the previous concerns have been addressed, and actually the site can be made suitable for residential accommodation without resorting to overly onerous, if you like, mitigation methods. In terms of Desborough Road and outlook for residents, as I tried to show on the previous drawings and images, part of it trying to address the previous issue we just discussed has actually resulted in a quite interesting form to that western elevation with the stepping, and that will help visually break up the mass of the building as well as provide a bit more visual interest. Obviously, the outlook is going to be impacted. At the moment, Desborough Road residents they look over a fence across the car park and beyond, so anything that happens on that site is going to impact their outlook. The issue is it to an unacceptable extent, to the extent where we should consider refusal of the application? In officers' views, we've looked at it, and again, it's probably realistically the best we can achieve, given the site constraints and the need to get an appropriate level of development on there to make the scheme viable, given that there's going to be various costs in terms of decontaminating the site and so on. And I also mentioned the windows there. So there are windows in that elevation, but they're high level, and the number have been minimised as best possible. So there'll be no overlooking or privacy issues in that regard. In terms of the street scene and not appropriately addressing the corner that was a concern of the previous scheme, hopefully you'll agree that this later scheme is far better. The other one was, again, fairly generic. This is a truly bespoke, looked at afresh. The architect has properly taken on board the context, and it's one of those rare occasions where he showed me the drawings and I didn't have any comments to make, which Liz will tell you is very unusual for me. So, so it is a good scheme, and I think that the architect's done very well to work with the constraints within the constraints of the site. and it will certainly provide something of interest on that, so effectively a gateway site into that part of the town centre. Loss of the car park is still the predominant concern that's been raised by members of the public who have commented on the scheme, and that was debated at length, if I recall, back in November. The main concern, though, was predominantly that the loss of the disabled spaces that are currently in Hand's Way. Parking surveys and so on have been undertaken, and there is sufficient capacity within other town centre car parks to make up for the 18 spaces, 19 spaces, normal spaces, if you like, that are there. And there is nearby disabled provision, albeit on-street bays in Wells Place, immediately adjacent to this site. So it's not that there will be no disabled parking available in the immediate locality. The concern from most individuals is that they would prefer to use the car park as opposed to the on-street bays. But it's not to say that there will be no disabled parking at all. Also, things have moved on since November, and there are now proposals to do as part of upgrading work to the Wells Place surface car park underneath the cinema to provide additional disabled spaces in there. So by the time this scheme, should it be approved, comes into use, hopefully there will actually be a greater provision in the town centre as a whole than there is at present through the additional spaces at Wells Place. And on the final reason for refusal mitigation, again, the applicant has agreed to secure the necessary mitigation should committee be minded to approve this evening. So therefore, in the other main issues to look at then, say layout design, say it's a difficult site, and I think this scheme does make best use of it given the constraints. In terms of access, parking at highways, again, this is a zero parking scheme, but that is something that we have accepted numerous times within the town centre. It's the most sustainable part of the borough. Easy access to the train station, bus station, supermarkets, all the facilities that anybody could need. Yes, concerns have been raised by some residents that people will park in nearby streets. Most of those streets, or all of them I think, are subject to parking restrictions, and any future residents moving into the development will be well aware they have nowhere to park and they will not get a new permit. But they do have good quality cycle store and so on. So in planning terms, it's not considered to be an issue. In terms of highway related issues, again, no objection from Hampshire Highways. In terms of amenity, as I mentioned earlier, whilst there will be an impact in terms of outlook to a degree on Desborough Road properties and loss of some direct sunlight at particular points of the day, on the whole, it's not to any unacceptable extent. Say whatever happens with this site, it will impact those residents to some degree, but the issue is whether it's to an unacceptable degree or not, and that's for yourselves to consider this evening. In terms of land condemnation, yes, we've got the conditions recommended and the same in terms of drainage. Ecology-wise, the site is a bit sparse in terms of ecology, to say the least, given that it's all tarmac. So any bit of planting other than the dandelion that might be poking up for a crack in the concrete will be an enhancement over what's there at present. And in terms of sustainability, it's a highly sustainable location. But in terms of the building, it's predominantly going to be a fabric-first approach, but there is scope for additional facilities and measures such as PV panels, etc., should they be required. So to conclude, say highly sustainable site, add to the mix of uses within the town centre. Amenity issues, previous amenity issues concerns have been addressed in officers' views. In terms of the loss of parking, there is alternative provision available in the town centre. And in officers' views, all the previous reasons for refusal have been acceptably addressed, and actually we've got not just acceptably addressed this, and some. This is a far better scheme than we had previously, and in all other requirements, all the necessary policy and guidance is met. So the recommendation, therefore, is to again delegate back to the Service Director for Planning and Environment, in conjunction with the Chair and the Vice Chair, to grant planning approval, subject to the couple of outstanding consultee responses and securing those mitigation requirements for New Forest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. So we've got nobody registered to speak in objection. Just check that nobody wants to speak in objection. No. So I'd like to invite Mr. Ian Humble to address the committee.
Thank you very much. I'll try and keep this relatively brief because I'll probably reiterate a lot of what Gary said. But again, I just wanted to sort of say we've tried really hard in the background with officers on this scheme to specifically address the reasons for refusal again. If I just start with the concerns surrounding noise and odour, as Gary said, we've now moved all bedrooms to the western side of the building just so we can keep them away from that noise source in the high street. We've also completely reconsidered the northern elevation, which backs onto the substation, because that was obviously a concern last time. So on that elevation, we've proposed solariums this time, so basically fully enclosable balconies rather than just open balconies. So residents, if they want an outside space, they've got that. But in the unlikely event that the noise becomes an issue to them, they've still got effectively an outside seating area, but they can close the doors on that space, which in England is probably a good thing, given that balconies don't often get used anyway. So there's no objection from the environmental health officer, which is obviously great, and we've worked hard with him to get to this point. So hopefully we've ticked the necessary boxes in that regard to make sure residents have a suitable sort of living accommodation in the middle of the town centre. The second reason for refusal, which we looked at very carefully, was the impact on the Desra Road residents. As Gary said, we've tried to create a stepped elevation on the western side, so they're not presented with a big, long, blank facade, which, in our opinion, would just be overbearing and probably unacceptable, in all honesty. The windows help to break up that elevation, but importantly, they're high level, so they'd be 1.7 metres minimum. So unless someone's invariably on tiptoes or on a box, you're not going to get that overlooking of the rear garden. So in combination, we feel with the separation distances as well, the orientation of the sun, those gardens and the rear windows won't be impacted, particularly as we've also pushed that third floor back just to create a little bit of extra relief. In terms of design, this was probably obviously one of the hardest points to overcome. We've looked to create a really interesting premise slightly on the fact that we've got the sewer easement anyway cutting across the site, but it gave us a good reason to provide a nice curved front facade with inset balconies, projecting brick detail, which will just liven up that elevation. On the Hansway frontage, we've tried to follow a similar theme with projecting brick courses. Lots of windows to break up the elevation, but importantly, it also provides natural surveillance of the rear of the high street, which, without saying the wrong thing, at certain times of the night probably will benefit from that, from a safety point of view. And we've also, very importantly, incorporated an area for public art, which you can just about see on that corner, which we're hoping will improve that kind of public realm, and that can be changed over time, and we're happy to sort of liaise with officers in terms of what that might look like. But I think in combination it should just provide a real focal on the corner. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll hurry up. The loss of the parking base is obviously a very contentious issue. We've looked at that in detail, and we accept why that is a sensitive point. There are parking bays within the vicinity of the site which will help to offset the loss. And I think importantly, with the continuous improvement works that Eastleigh are undertaking in 23 and 24, any lost parking bays will be redelivered through that scheme of works, I would have thought, concurrently with this development, I would hope. So there should be no overall impact, or minimal as best we can, on disabled users. And the fifth reason for refusal, which related to impact in terms of nitrates, and the New Forest SPA, again, we'll do the necessary in terms of buying credits and paying the offset contributions. So in summary, we're hoping that we've created something that will be a real high quality development in what is a real gateway location, just to the rear of the high street, and we're genuinely of the view that this will create really something special in this important location. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So I'll now open it up to councillors for questions. Any questions? Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the Hampshire Swifts, which is mentioned on page 41, points 29 and 30, the previous scheme had 2 Swift bricks. and the Hampshire Swifts recommend there should be one per dwelling. What has this scheme got? Has it got any Swift bricks? How many?
In terms of ecological enhancements, nothing at the moment, but we do have a condition that requires details of what there will be. There's certainly scope to include swift ledges, back bricks, and so on. Within, ideally, they would be in the fabric of the building. Ones you attach afterwards can fall off or be taken off. So, but there's certainly scope to include them in the building, and you've got to get them on the appropriate elevation so they don't overheat or they don't get too cold and that sort of thing. But there's certainly there's scope to do it, and as I say, I believe there is a condition requiring those details to be submitted and agreed with our ecologists at a later date.
Thank you.
I've got a question. So this is a temporary Eastleigh Borough car park. So it's not an ELAC car park, it's an Eastleigh Borough Council car park, and it's temporary. So theoretically, this could be shut at any time. So if we don't go ahead with this, it doesn't mean it can continue as a car park, and it could be shut.
Yes. Yeah, consent was only ever granted, 2005 as a car park. I think there always was an intention to do something with this site, but as happens, time moves on far more swiftly than we all would like, and it sort of never really happened, and everybody's got used to the idea that this is now a car park. But yes, it was only ever granted temporary consent, but ultimately it's council land, and it's for the council to determine how it wishes to use that land. This is what's been put forward. I think the decision to redevelop the car park was agreed in 2019 at Cabinet, but it's now as a planning application, it's within your jurisdiction as a local area committee to determine it. But yes, theoretically, the car park could just be shut tomorrow, and that would be it.
No more questions?
I was just a bit concerned about this question of odours coming from the high street. You've moved, excuse me, you've moved the bedrooms to the western side, but odours waft on the air. So you did some assessments for noise levels. I think you quoted BS 8233. Are there any British Standard assessments for odours? Or I think I saw somewhere in your report, and you also mentioned there'd be mechanical ventilation. Is that air filters? Or?
The previous scheme, there was odours are subjective. It's not like noise where you can actually physically measure what decibel levels are. Odours are subjective. What you might like as a smell, I might hate, or what you might think is really strong smell, somebody else might not be able to detect it at all. So that was a concern raised in part of the previous scheme. Whilst no surveys were undertaken as part of this scheme, the same consultant was employed again who undertook the original assessments, both in terms of noise and odour. So there was an odour assessment done as part of the previous scheme, and it was done on the hottest day of the year last year, or the previous year, when we had stupidly hot periods. So because there was concern that bins at the back of the Pizza Hut and so on, and extract flues and all this sort of thing was raised concern. And it turned out that whilst there was odour present, it was probably not to an extent where it would be really terrible place in which to live, but I say, because it's a subjective issue, sort of a belt and braces approach was taken to the previous scheme, and they looked at, well, we'll just seal all the windows up and we'll have it completely mechanically ventilated with odour neutralisation. This scheme, that's not, whilst we've got mechanical ventilation, it's not been deemed by environmental health that there needs to be any odour neutralisation equipment, because mainly they're looking at protecting bedrooms overnight. During the day, those sort of noises and odours are not so easily perceived, but at night, when everything's quiet and you're trying to get to sleep, that's when they're more present, or they might be there all along, but you sense them more. But environmental health are of the view that there shouldn't be a need for any odour neutralisation equipment, but they will have a backup of the mechanical ventilation should that be an issue. But really it turns out the surveys, the main issue in this area is noise. Sporadic noise as opposed to constant traffic noise, which you sort of get used to. So it's sort of sporadic noise of doors slamming and music and stuff like that. But again, so that's the main reason why the bedrooms have been pushed to the western side, or the most protected side, if you like, of the site, away from potential sources of noise, which are mainly to the east.
You're right, actually. I mean, subjective is the word that I would have used. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bicknell.
Didn't want to disappoint Gary. On page 35, paragraph 16, it says the existing access from Handsway shall be stopped up and abandoned, and the footway crossing reinstated in accordance with details to be approved by the local planning authority in conjunction with the highway authority. Can you explain, please?
Our colleagues at Hampshire Highways asked for that. So there's an existing drop curb, obviously, to get into the car park, which you can just see on this one, actually. So there's an existing drop curb there, which is the entrance into the car park. It's fairly standard that if you're losing that vehicular access, they want the pavement reinstated back to a level pavement. So normal curves would be put back in there, and it would be reinstated to a flat surface. So.
Why didn't 16 just say that?
Because you've got to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Okay, could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Park, and a seconder? Councillor Reynolds. Okay, and now we'll move on to debate. Any debate? Councillor Irish.
Chairman, I hate to say it, but it's a pretty awful design, isn't it, to dump a block like that in our town centre between houses, between the Wells Place Centre and the shops. And it's a really weird, strange-looking structure to me. I don't really feel very comfortable with it, really.
I thought the CGI makes it look really good, actually.
Yeah. Sorry, but I don't think it's a particularly good thing.
Thank you, Chair. I actually voted in favour of this last time. However, looking at this application, I'm actually glad the majority voted against, because otherwise we wouldn't have this one in front of us. Because I actually think that this is far superior, and I think that project team perhaps need to think a little bit more out the box next time they put some of this stuff in front of councillors, to address the issues first time round rather than second time, Jonathan. Because I think the architects have done a superb job. I wasn't necessarily in favour 100% architecturally last time, especially the back wall against Desborough Road. And it was quite a sort of fine balance that I did vote in favour of it. But I think the team that have done this have done a superb job on a very difficult site with a lot of constraints, and basically have ticked, as far as I'm concerned, ticked all the boxes with reference to quality of living for residents by thinking out of the box and putting the bedrooms at the back of the property, in effect, along Desborough Road on the western side, and have also given residents have the option to be able to open windows or have an outdoor space on a balcony, or they can close the windows and use the mechanical ventilation, which is an accepted practice. It might not be ideal, we might not like it, but it is an accepted practice. And obviously the bed and breakfast on the corner of Chestnut Avenue was granted. It's probably out of time by now, I would think, actually, because it's got to be more than 5 years ago, but that was on mechanical ventilation and such like. It is a town centre site. Got it. It's dead. It's a town centre site. Obviously, it is next door to a building that is already 3 stories high, and that is a gateway building. The visual appearance of it and the architecture, in the eye of the beholder. At the end of the day, I personally like it. Others might dislike it. I think the massing of the building is appropriate for the site, given the fact that it's near Bradbury House there, and steps down to well, it's about half a storey taller than the properties on Desborough Road. At the end of the day. So overall, yeah, I like it. I'm in favour of it. Obviously, you've got the issues with the parking, but having read the access statement and having had a look on the way here tonight, there are 9 disabled spot bays, closer to some of the properties that have been mentioned than there actually is in Wells Place, which actually has also got 3 extra disabled bays than it was originally designed to do because it was converted due to COVID. So I'm happy and confident that there is sufficient parking elsewhere for people that have less mobility, but except that it might not be as convenient. But then again, this is a property that is, again, like the previous one, providing affordable housing that is staying in Eastleigh Borough Council's control, and providing some of the, some families or people off of our waiting list, which is currently 1,800 plus, and that. So yes. So yeah. So I say overall, I do like it. Happy to support it, and glad we got to this one because this is a better design than the last one, Jonathan.
Councillor Beer.
I mean, Councillor Bicknell raises a really interesting point of whether we should reject everything first time round and just see if the next time's better. I agree. I think this is significantly better. I really quite like it. I'm really glad to hear that the Wells Place car park has been increased in size, because obviously the disabled parking was raised significantly last time by residents. So yeah, overall, I personally, I don't particularly think it's massively beautiful, but I don't think that's what we're here to look at. So yeah, overall happy to support.
You point in, or Councillor Spencer?
Yeah, I did vote against the last plan because it is a difficult place to put a development, not only because of the smells and sounds and everything, but loss of the car park too. I really do appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this because it has, pretty much in every single way addressed the problems that we raised last time, and because of it, it's come back in a much improved state. I really like the design. I think it's one of the nicest things that I've seen in the last year, so good work there. I really do like it. It has, yes, it's my kind of thing. I like that. But yeah, mostly the roundness. As you come around the corner, I think that's really positive, and in that urban edge, it's a nice thing to see. So yeah, really good stuff from everyone involved. I'm really impressed.
Councillor Park.
Thank you. I'll let age go before beauty. So for me, I agree with Councillor Spencer that curve does help, and certainly this is sort of the first significant building you come to from that side of town when you're going to enter into it. So it's good that it's something distinctive, and shows that you're entering into the town. The current view is a car park, and then you look beyond that, you've got the electricity substation. It's not very welcoming, to say. This is a statement building as such, and so I like that. The addition of the stepped bit on the side to allow for the bedrooms to be moved to that side, and then the perpendicular windows, I think is fabulous, because you add a lot of natural light for bedrooms, but you're not adding to the overlooking problems. So I was really appreciative of that. For me, for the town centre to be vibrant and to continue to thrive, we need to, I hate this term, the densification of the town centre. I like the principle, but I just don't like the word. The more people we've got living in and around the town centre, the more that the businesses within that town centre will survive and will get new businesses, and that will be a benefit for everybody within the town and the borough. So I really applaud that. And I applaud the provision of 1 or 2 bedroom housing, as Paul has mentioned already today. That's what we mostly need in the housing list. So that's all welcome to me. So unfortunately, I think, Councillor Irish, you're in the minority here with your view on the building. But I'm very much in favour of this compared to the last one. So well done, thank you.
Councillor Mann?
Well, I voted against it last time as well, but this time I think it's a much improved building. And the original building that was there was an eyesore as well, that had to be knocked down. And that's when we got the temporary car park. So I think it's, yeah, when you come into the town, like Councillor Park said, that it looks much better than looking at the substation.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Reynolds?
Yeah, I mean, wasn't here before in November, so I didn't see the original plans, but I have gone through all the reasons for refusal and studied them considerably so that I could make a judgment today. And I have to say, I actually like the building. My husband doesn't, by the way, but I actually do. I like the softness of the curves. I think it's quite artistic, and I like the idea that you're going to have a work of art later down the line. I also think that what we've done is met the social, the environmental, which was summed up well by Tanya, that you're meeting the social, environmental, and most importantly as well, social, providing homes for people who need them. So yes, I'm for it. Okay.
So let's move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 9, the nationally significant infrastructure project application for M3 Junction 9 improvement scheme. So I'd like to ask Liz to present the report. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is completely different to anything else we've been talking about today. For those who aren't aware, there are some schemes and projects that are deemed to be of such size and scale that they're not put forward as applications to the local authority. Instead, they're put forward as what's classified as a nationally significant infrastructure project, and the planning inspectorate determine consider the applications and put forward a recommendation to the relevant Secretary of State. So this one is for a scheme you've probably already heard of, for the improvements to Junction 9 of the M3 around Winchester. So that's, as you can see, most of the works are here around the roundabout, but they do have to, because they're making alterations to the slip roads, the application boundary is quite extensive. All the works are outside of the borough, but just as a bit of background information, this is an extract of the main part of the work. So you can see there'll be a free-flowing link from the A34 to the M3, so that you don't have to go up to the Winnell roundabout as you currently do. The M3 in the vicinity of Junction 9 will also be increased from 3 lanes to 4. There'll be a new connection between the A33 and the M3 going northbound, and then there's also some new walking and cycling and horse riding routes across and around it. Those are the sort of the orange lines there. So, because obviously off to the east you've got the national park, and then the roundabout itself will be realigned and will be a non-signalised roundabout with new bridges, but with the removal of the A34 traffic and the A33 traffic, it's hoped that that should make for a much easier transition between the various arms of the roundabout and increase capacity and reduce delays that are happening on this roundabout at present. Just in case you weren't aware where the Junction 9 was, this is the borough boundary down here, and we don't have delegated powers to determine these applications as officers, so it's been brought to ELAC as just about the closest local committee to the proposed work. So it has to go to one of them, and because of the way the M3 curves, it's come to ELAC. Another point, as you'll have seen from the main report, is that the River Itchen flows from the sort of almost through the application site and then down through the borough. So that was just to put that into context here. That's one of the slides they'd prepared. So the River Itchen obviously is a special area of conservation, and its quality and the ecological value of it is something that we need to be sure we're protecting. So, as I explained, it's a nationally significant infrastructure project that the Planning Inspectorate will be considering. All of the works are outside of the borough, but we've been consulted as a neighbouring authority, and we've been asked to submit a local impact report by the Planning Inspectorate, which will need to outline any likely impacts of the proposed works on the our authority's area. There are later stages in the process where we may be required also to write, submit written representations if there's things that need to be commented on in more detail, or if we're asked to complete a statement of common ground, which is where it's a document that the applicant and the relevant body both set out any agreed positions or agreed areas of disagreement. And then also there may be the need for the Planning Inspectorate to ask us specifically further questions that may arise as part of their determination. So the recommendation before you tonight is to seek delegated authority to do those elements. As you'll see from the report and my next slide, there aren't too many issues, we don't think, in relation to this scheme and our borough and our residents, so it's not expected that there'll be significant work following on from the submission of the local impact report. So the key issues, it's considered that the likely impacts within the borough are limited to those arising from construction traffic travelling through the borough, and then the impact on the River Itchen, as I just mentioned, as this flows down from this application site into the borough. Following consultations with ecology, environment health, and one other, can't remember. No, just those two, sorry. I was just thinking about the traffic. So following those consultations, ecology have indicated that subject to the detailed provisions of the environmental management plan, that there'd be no adverse impact on the River Itchen. And environmental health, although they did make some comments with regard to noise and the measures to reduce the noise impact on the M3 generally on residents within the borough, it's not felt that that's something we can reasonably ask for as part of this proposal, because the red edge and the application boundary is not within the borough or even adjacent to it in any sense. So it's not considered there'd be any other adverse impacts in relation to air quality either. So the recommendation is just to seeking delegated authority to write a local impact report on the basis of identifying that the route of the construction traffic could be is a key consideration, but could be suitably controlled through the approval of a detailed traffic management plan, and equally the impact on the River Itchen could suitably be controlled by another document that would be secured should the Secretary of State decide to issue any consent for these works. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bicknell?
Thank you, Chair. It's a sort of question, comment. I'm not sure if there's going to be a debate. I don't, because it's not a proposal as such. So thanks for the briefing. The only thing I would say is, whatever our response is, we need to be really heavy-handed where it comes to the River Itchen, because it does flow through the borough. And whilst the works are not in the borough or close enough to the borough, if there is an issue and anything gets into the Itchen, then that can actually cause issues into the borough, because it'd be our water that gets polluted. And these sorts of works will include, they're going to have to do an awful lot of protection of the Itchen to shield it because they're doing flyovers and all sorts and what have you, and piling and everything else and what have you. So they need to be very careful, and I've seen some of this stuff from the railway, not on the Itchen, but where they've had to almost divert the flow of a river to be able to repair a collapsed embankment or something. In fact, the river was caused the collapse bit. And this is the sort of heavy, really big stuff that they're going to have to be really careful with. And if they do, dislodge an embankment that comes into, that falls into the itching, or a big oil spill or something. So I just think we need to be very mindful of the itching, that we're really, lay it on heavy with reference to the itching. Other than that, it's as you say, really. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Park, and a seconder. Councillor Irish. Any debate? No, I'd just reiterate what Councillor Bicknell said about the river itching, but I also think that this will be a massive benefit to the residents of Eastleigh Borough, because going north and getting stuck on that roundabout and the slip road is quite painful sometimes for somebody who goes that way quite a lot. So the end state of constructions should be of massive benefit to the residents. Okay, so all those in favour? Okay, carried unanimously. Thank you so much, Liz. Item 10, Eastleigh Off-Street Car Parks, new regulations. I'd like to ask Rob to present his report.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a presentation, so you'll have to just listen to me, unfortunately. Hope that's okay. As you'll see in the report, the recommendations are listed obviously there. And this is part of the Council's developing parking strategy to mainly encourage some better use of some of our currently unregulated car parks, particularly in the Eastleigh Town area. And it's proposed, obviously, to introduce what is essentially a traffic regulation order, a TRO, as you'll hear me refer to quite a bit, which is essentially a car parks order, a parking order, but it's the same thing as you would have for on-street. The off-street TRO that we're looking to introduce as multiple TROs at different locations will enable council civil enforcement officers to undertake civil parking enforcement, known as CPE, which could include issuing penalty charge notices to any vehicles found contravening various regulations. And you'll see in the report there's a list of different types of contraventions that we can enforce. I won't bore you by listing all those, but they're all there for your delight. The abuse of certain protected bays in a lot of our car parks, especially if vehicles park in disabled persons parking bays, try saying that, without a blue badge, can contribute to general antisocial parking problems, as we know, through our own use of car parks. And through parking enforcement, the car parks can be better regulated and enjoyed by all, of course, if people should be parking where they should be. Now, the council CEOs, the council officers can patrol these car parks throughout the week and undertake enforcement as appropriate as part of their regular enforcement duties. Some locations experience unauthorised usage, such as the paid permit holder car park on Upper Market Street in Eastleigh, which is for commercial users. By placing a TRO on this site, for example, those permit holder bays can be enforced. Any unauthorised vehicles left could receive a penalty charge notice. Because it's a CPE, civil parking enforcement regime in Eastleigh Borough, it's exactly the same as we would do for any other car park, and any penalty charge notice issued is either a higher rate or lower rate amount, which is either £70 or £50, depending on the type of contravention. Obviously, the more serious parking tends to have a £70 rate. Going on to the specifics of the car parks, we're looking at, in the area of Fleming Park, the Places Leisure car park and also Pavilion on the Park car park. Now, drawing attention to those two, this is mainly to address some of the parking problems we have at those sites, particularly with the abuse of the disabled bays. And we've been asked for quite a while now by operators at PLE to enforce those car parks if we can. And by introducing a parking order, a TRO, we can do that for them. We also could enforce other types of restrictions if we want to going forward, such as restricted spaces and so forth. Drawing attention to Falkland Road car park. This is a car park where we think it would benefit from increased turnover to aid the local businesses and units around that car park. We would propose to install a ticket machine at the car park for free vend for limited waiting. So a user would obtain a free ticket for an amount of agreed hours worth of parking, like you would do at Bishop's Oak Road car park, for example. And that would encourage turnover of the car park, enabling spaces to be freed up for users throughout the operating hours of the week. The introduction of the new car park excuse me, at Bandstand Court on Romsey Road We are already seeing abuse of those car parks by non-residents. By introducing a TRO, we can simply enforce a permit scheme for the residents of the Bandstand Court facility, so that will protect those users. And as I mentioned earlier, the Upper Market Street car park, we can protect those commercial users who park in that car park at the moment, which has long been an issue at that particular location for people parking there to pop into town, etc., and avoiding paying in the adjacent pay and display car parks. I think I've covered most things there, but obviously happy to take questions, but that is generally what we're proposing. Everything would be subject to public consultation because it's a new TRO, and once they're in place, we can put those in relatively quickly and enforce as required. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions for Rob on this? Councillor Irish.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Rob, I'm a little bit confused here. You say Bandstand Court car park. I'm not quite sure which car park we're talking about there.
No.
Is this the one on the new, with the new development?
Yeah.
One community where they've got
That's it.
Four
That's the one.
spaces?
Yeah, so with the resident parking at the back, which is access through the service roads, which is for the
Right.
residents' use, and then on the front, fronting onto Romsey Road, is those a couple of protected spaces for one community, for example. So it's that entire site that we can enforce. So the residents would need permits to park at the back, and we can provide permits for one community, for example, for those protected spaces. And it also enables enforcement of the disabled spaces in that particular car park as well.
Right, because my understanding is that those spaces in the front, you say two of them are disabled, that's fine, but one is for the CEO of one community and the other one is for Devon. That's age concern. Is that still the case?
That's right. Yeah, we would make sure they've got permits.
Oh, I see. That's fine. Yeah, thanks for that. I was a little bit confused, but you've clarified it now. Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. So could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Park, and a seconder? Councillor Irish. Any debate? No? So just, I was at Places Leisure yesterday evening, and there's a drop-off zone, and there were 8 cars in the drop-off zone with no drivers. So they obviously weren't dropping off. And they just parked there, and they were there for over an hour that I was there. And then, so people were actually trying to be dropped off. It was done in a dangerous fashion with kids getting out of cars in moving traffic. So it's really important that that this goes through, and obviously the disabled bays, because there are quite a lot of disabled users at the leisure centre, and parking can be a problem if they have to then park elsewhere. So I'm really pleased to support this. So let's go to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. We're now going to the outside bodies report. Is this you, Guy? It says Siobhan.
It was a bit of a double act between us, because various emails come back to you.
Right. Yes. So let's get to the right part of the report. So this is to add myself, Councillor Irish, Councillor Park and Councillor Reynolds to the licensing panel, Councillor Irish to be on the Test Valley Liaison Group. What we have got though is we need someone for shop watch, because unfortunately Councillor Dedaya said that it clashed with his work, so he wouldn't be able to attend that. So I'd be looking for a volunteer to go on to the shop watch, which I believe was Tuesday mornings. Yeah. So I don't know if we've got somebody who want to go on shop. Oh, Councillor Reynolds, thank you very much. Okay, so then age concern, Councillor Irish, AWCA, Councillor Mann, Barton Peveril and Eastleigh College, Councillor Spencer, Councillor Park, Councillor Bicknell, Lakeside Country Users, Councillor Bicknell. Pavilion on the Park, Councillor Irish and Councillor Spencer. The Hub, Councillor Beer. And then we did have one, we've got one vacancy for the University of Southampton Wide Lane Sports Facility User Advisor Group. Now, we do know that this hasn't met for a number of years, but since they've submitted plans for a pitch and they'll want to go for floodlights, I would suspect that they might want to reactivate the outside body to engage with us. Councillor Spencer, well played. So if we adopt that rather than as written, if you're following me, does anyone have any questions? Can I have a proposer? Councillor Park. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Bicknell. Any debate? All those in favour? Thank you kindly. Okay, we now move on to item 12, the financial management report, and it's over to Guy.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so a number of these items we've discussed at the team meeting, but there are two ones which are introduced in the report, and that's mainly in response to some work which happened subsequent to that team meeting, which brought about a couple of changes. So the first one, Lakeside Country Park, that's obviously quite a sizable sum which is before you, £119,000 worth of improvements proposed. You've already given your approval for allocating for prioritising the access ramp, so that's £24,000 worth of it, but the rest is trying to bring improve the main route around the internal part of the country park to make it all weather and address some of the issues that we've got in particularly in the winter when it gets almost impassable and certainly not passable for wheelchair users. So the costings came in fairly recently, and bearing in mind that I know you want to try and get some of this work done before the winter, I've snuck it into this report, so apologies for the bit of short notice and the lack of being able to discuss it at the team meeting. So I'll come back to the financing of that. The other one is the Hub tennis courts. Again, you've already approved this one in previous committees. This is where we were supporting a Lawn Tennis Association funded, grant-funded project to upgrade the tennis courts at the Hub. Since then, they have gone away and they're done some detailed design, and there's an increase in cost, not surprising really because of there's inflation, but also because there's a need, or now there's a recommendation that we actually put a higher fence in to prevent some of the unwanted access to those courts. So you've got a combination of those two factors which bring a £15,500 increase to that originally approved allocation. So all the rest are the same as we've talked about previously. In terms of the funding, Councillor Bicknell's email this afternoon, which I've responded to, I was going to be sort of mentioning that I've been able to review our developer contributions database and found another source of developer contributions which I'll be able to substitute for the revenue reserve recommendation, which is in this report in part. So with that in mind, I've got two revised recommendations. The first to number one is to make that 119,000, so the same figure, but all funded from developer contributions. So that changes that, rather than an element coming from the revenue reserve. I've given this wording to Julia and Nikki, so that hopefully you're content with the general gist of that recommendation. Rather, I'm happy to read out word for word. In fact, I will do that. So 119,467 is allocated for Lakeside Country Park improvements from developers' contributions, would be that recommendation. Then number 4 is the only other one that changes, which is £15,000 is allocated for the hub tennis courts improvements with 12,500 from the revenue reserve and 2,500 from developer contributions. So that's just the balance that's available from that other pot. And I would need to do some corresponding changes to the wording in the report to reflect that in detail, but I won't go over those unless you want me to. So if happy to take any other questions on those two items or any of the other items in the report.
So the contribution to the hub tennis is a matched contribution, so we'll put 15,500 and then the Lawn Tennis Association will match that.
No, they're already putting 53,000 into the project. Right. So ours is a contribution to that, particularly into buckets on the fences and all that. So we're not funding the contribution of the
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. It's going back to Lakeside, and it does sort of tie in with the tennis, only on principle. Are we absolutely sure that we're going to get this Lakeside work delivered on time so that we don't end up having another report that says due to inflationary costs? And a delay causes us an inflationary cost, so we end up paying more for the same thing.
I'll have to, so this is a budget estimate prepared by our construction maintenance team. So I can't give you that guarantee at this moment until I've they've gone out and got some detailed quotes, which they wouldn't want to do until they've got approval from you in principle. So there is a sequence of events there. So I will certainly be able to come back to you, hopefully by the 20th of June team meeting, where I can give you a bit of clarification on that.
Councillor Bear.
So fantastic to hear that the 83,500 is now coming from developers' contributions. Sorry, the full amount, 120,000, is going from developer contributions. There's still about £72,500 in the spending that's coming from revenue reserves. How much, what as a percentage, what is that from the revenue reserves? Just because it's going to great causes, I'm not knocking that at all. I'm just saying I'm just want to know roughly where we are on that.
Yeah, so at the moment, you've got a balance of 252 in unallocated revenue reserve in your pot. So 72 leaves you a reasonable balance, which is a much healthier position than we've been in for many years, actually. But, yeah.
Councillor Bicknell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to reply to Guy, but I was just thinking about it, and then somebody else jumped in there. It just concerns me that we allocate money, and then because of delay in delivering the project, we then get hit with inflationary costs. So, because we end up, we have these reports, and you know we allocate the money quite happily. What concerns me is the fact that these reports are public. Members of the public can see, for argument's sake, a project's going to cost £100,000. Then when we actually deliver it, it costs 120 or 130. And there could become the time where we start a project or want to do a project, we allocate £100,000, and then due to inflationary costs or something else, more money's needed, but we haven't got it there. And so then we end up not having a project. And obviously we've allocated quite a substantial sum of money at the moment to the paddling pool to deliver what we have done so far, and there's more to come. Is that going to be, we're going to need to allocate more, or we're going to have to downscale the project? These are real concerns I have with allocating monies so far out, where then we haven't got a full costing, or sort of getting quotes. I know we've done it in the past, but unfortunately inflation is hitting us. and we've got to be careful and sensible with taxpayers' money. And actually, you know, if we say we're going to deliver a project for 100,000, we need to make sure we do deliver it for 100,000, and that. So, yeah, I have a concern. We'll wait and see what comes back. But I do think we need to be very mindful of these reports. There are some updates on previous reports where I'm not sure if the projects will be done, but I won't bring that out at this meeting. I've got the 2 reports here. I'll send an email round for correspondence via email, because one meeting, I'm not sure if it was the last one or the one before, I did actually ask for updates on projects where we've allocated money. It wasn't minuted, but there haven't been any updates. But I can do that via email. But so I do have that concern that we allocate and then we don't meet the requirements for the sum that we actually allocate. So, thank you.
Okie doke. Could I have a proposer? Councillor Park, and a seconder? Councillor Bicknell. Any debate? Councillor Park.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, having walked the dog past the Hub tennis courts a couple of weekends ago and seen some people, some youngsters, much more agile than I, very happily jumping over those, what I thought was very high fencing. Any increase in the standards of that to try and dissuade them from doing so is very welcome.
Oh, Councillor Bicknell.
I was just going to say that I welcome these. I think there's some really, really good projects here. And that, I mean, obviously I'm extremely biased when it comes to Lakeside, having been connected with it since 2010, and that. So yeah, listen, and obviously Colston's that make get a decision and do something with that finally. So there's some good stuff here for residents. And of course, we've also got another headache, is that when we get the new City for Wales place, what are we going to do with the existing ones? And that. I'm sure we can all come up with a dozen ideas where they can go. And that. So yeah, it's good to see. But I say, proofs in the pudding of delivery. And that. But it's good to actually have them on paper.
I suppose one thing is it's allocated, but it's not spent. So if you go out and get the quotes and it's silly money, it will come back to committee. Okay. So all those in favour? Excellent. Thank you, councillors. Now we have to note the planning appeals. Can I ask that we note the planning appeals? The next meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 26th of September, 7 p.m. here at the Point. I'd like to say thank you and good evening.